Now, here's something that hasn't been widely reported but has consequences for all of us. The cost of shipping crude around the world has shot up to 11-year highs after the United States blacklisted Chinese ships. More than 40 VLCCs, or Very Large Crude Carriers, operated by China's Cosco Shipping Energy Transportation, have been blacklisted for moving sanctioned Iranian oil. Cosco has a total of 1,100 ships. Iran's oil tankers, estimated to be around 54, have also been sanctioned. In total, nearly 300 tankers have been blacklisted, including Venezuela's. That represents about 3% of the world's oil tanker fleet, according to Refinitiv Eikon. That sent the cost of hiring a ship from $18,000 to almost $300,000 a day. To ship crude from the US Gulf to Asia, the longest route to ship oil now costs around $14 million. Well, add to that, sanctioned countries are still managing to get crude to customers by offloading at sea and switching off tracking devices. Who better to pick all this up with than Rajat Kapoor, Managing Director of Oil and Gas at AWR Lloyd. Thanks for being with us, Rajat. So what needs to happen to bring tanker prices down? Should we be concerned here? Who's shouldering the cost?
Obviously, a big effect of the tanker prices and where they are today has got to do with the current sanctions that the US administration has put on Iranian crude. In order to prevent offloading of Iranian crude in the high seas, in order to stop, at least to the bare minimum, export of crude to China, the US, as you know, last month imposed sanctions on the tanker subsidiaries of Cosco, which is China's shipping line and is the largest shipping line in the world. So once you have the sanctions coming in from the US on these entities, on these particular tankers, they suddenly become hotcakes. Nobody wants to touch these tankers. And these volumes are then taken off the international trade. And that's a substantial piece of hardware that goes out. And obviously, supply demand, the prices shoot up. We've also got to realize that it's not just the Iranian-China connection. There are other aspects to the increase in tanker trade as well. As you know, the Venezuelan sanctions are also in place. Similar to Iranian crude, tankers handling Venezuelan crude are also under the lens. That puts away another piece of kit out of circulation. And as you know, the IMO 2020 restrictions are set to kick in the next 3 months. Which basically means that the ships need to adhere to a rather stricter level of pollution control. So a good number of ships have actually in the docks and they're going in for upgrades, scrubbers and things like that. So all these things, three things put together, is what is currently impacting the rise in the tanker freights.
Is that cost, though, that increase in cost, being passed on to the likes of you and I?
Obviously, the crude transporter, or whether it's the refiner that is taking in the crude, once he's got to pay an additional cost to ship his crude, he's going to mark his products, the final end product that comes out of the refinery, the gasoline, the petrol, the LPG, at a higher cost, which you and I have to pay, unfortunately.
Okay. Iran has always said that it has the means to get oil onto the market in spite of the sanctions. There is a lot of sanctions busting going on here. How's that happening?
You got to realize, Adrian, I mean, even if we look back 30, 40, 50 years in history, the informal crude trade, the informal crude sale, whether it was the barter system or it was the off-market sale of crude, has always existed in Iran. From the times of the Shah in the 70s, when Iran was producing at its peak at about 6 million barrels of crude, there were always barrels that were available off the coast of Iran, north of the coastline of the Arabian Gulf states, where crude was sold informally. Of course, that was, and that has continued till this day. I mean, if you were to stand on any one of the Gulf states along the coastline and with a high-powered binoculars, you could even today see these small barges having 20, 30, 40,000 barrels of crude, which was obviously Iranian in origin, and it was being sold at high seas. So Iran has always found a way to get its crude, to sell its crude away from the eyes of the formal market, as it were. Of course, this crude was either pilfered, was either siphoned off given the seepages in the Iran supply chain. But now what we're seeing is a sort of a state, if not sponsored, then state-sanctioned sale of Iranian crude away from the prying eyes
Okay.
of the West.
So help me
And
understand
that
this.
is happening by means of high seas transfer, things like that.
Help me understand this then. As far as the sanctions are concerned, Iran is still able to trade with anyone it wants in terms of oil. It's just that the payment can't be in dollars. Is that how the sanctions work? So it's okay for them to come offshore and offload from one tanker to another as long as the payment isn't in dollars?
The most kind of stringent aspect of the sanctions that came in early last year was Section 1245 of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which actually imposes penalties on financial institutions which are in any way connected with Iranian and Iranian crude. That includes banks, financial institutions, lenders, and government treasuries as well. So whilst Iran has the crude, and whilst there is a huge appetite, at least amongst Asian consumers, to take that crude, very few people are reluctant to get that crude into their inventories and refineries because it's difficult to pay for it. How do you pay for it? Iran, for the longest period of time, never accepted dollars. They had benchmarked their crude in euros for the longest period of time. Even when the sanctions were not there, NIOC, NIGC always dealt in euros, not in dollars. Today, even that is difficult. Iran is today selling its crude. It's down from 3.5 million barrels, 4 million barrels a day. It was about 3 million barrels per day earlier this year. Even today, by most estimates, they are still selling 400,000 odd barrels of crude every day. A lot of that is money that is routed away from international banking channels. Some amount of it is done in barter system, white goods, iPads, iPhones, washing machines, the likes. And there is a good amount of crude that is currently being sold on credit by the Iranian government in the hope that when the sanctions go, they'll be able to encash that IOU.
Fascinating. Rajat, many thanks indeed for being with us. Really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost.
Thank you, Adrian. Good to be here.